Hello everyone, Lori here. I am going to show you today some cool tricks. I'll be using Artisan 5. Some of the things can also be done in Artisan 4. I want you to see how to use a kit, thinking about some of the different things and parts of a template also, but really making it your own and having fun with it. This is the layout that I made. I've used the Jumpstart Designs WonderFALL kit. Beautiful, bright fall sorts of colors with some nice inspirational messages. I just love this. I'll move it back off the screen. And the template that I'm using is Heartstrings Scrap Art Instalove 2. Now, if we look at this template to begin with, before I start pulling anything in, you'll notice there are some shadows that are already attached underneath these photos. So those shadows help give this sort of a bendy look, lifted up on some of the edges to some of the photos. And I really like doing that. If I decide to move a photo to a different area when I have one of those types of shadows attached, I make sure that I also attach the shadow. So here's the photo, here's the mat, and here's the shadow that goes with it. And I can grab it and I can just move it wherever I want. You can see that that shadow will go with it. Now, if I wanted to resize this, I could group it, then I could resize and ungroup. And if it says cannot ungroup, it's because of that aspect ratio, but that's fine. I'm going to just close that. I'm going to right mouse aspect ratio and I can say restore the original aspect ratio. So if it ends up getting narrower or wider than the original, that's when you can't ungroup. So now I will ungroup and it works perfectly fine for me. It's just a matter of not moving forward, making sure that you go back and you change that aspect ratio again. At this point, I'm going to leave that for the moment, even though I resized it. But at this point, I want to show you what I do to begin with when I come into a busy template like this. You know, I've got all of these flowers. You can see all of these different layers. And I don't like working with everything like that because these flowers aren't going to stay part of my layout. Even if I make clusters that look vaguely like these won't be the flowers. These are just flat elements. I'm not going to fill them with paper. I'm not going to leave them the same. They're going to be replaced. But I like to leave them there as a guide because some designers don't put a preview. And if there isn't a preview and then I delete these, I don't really remember how it was if I want to try to emulate it. So I'm just going to start off the page and I'm going to grab, drag and drop over so that I'm grabbing most of these things together. And you can see that this leaf wasn't selected, so I can hold my control key. I can actually grab that leaf also. There's also a bit of string here that's not selected. I'm going to leave that string because I might decide that I want to keep that afterwards. I might not, but that's okay. I can right mouse now and I can group all of these together. You can see that the string popped to the top. It really doesn't make a difference to me. If I care about that, I could go and move the whole thing forward. But really, I've just got this sitting here to remember what this looked like before I started, in case I want to kind of go in that same sort of a general direction as I'm placing my elements. I do the same thing up here. I'm going to grab and bring it around and drag. Now in this case, you can see that I've got the photo selected. I definitely don't want to get rid of that photo, so when I look down here, it's the photo, the mat, and the shadow. I'll use my control key, deselect those, and now I have everything else. I can right mouse, group, group. And then those will become just a guide for when I start filling this in. Now I'm not going to fill in all the photos. You guys all know how to do that. I am going to show you, however, a couple of other tricks. If we go over to the layout that I made from that template, you'll see that instead of the paper in the background, I used a photo. I've got this piece right here, this little like paint chip with sayings, and I included that shadow like the photos to make that lifted. I'm going to show you how I did that. And I've got a few other little tricks here that I'm going to show you. But let's start with doing some of the things that I've got going on already over on the other layout. To begin with, I didn't mention this, I do like to get rid of all of those instructions that I do not need. And then I have space to put in the name of the kit, so I can type that in. If I could spell correctly on my first go, wouldn't that be wonderful? Okay. Now I'm going to start pulling in some of the papers and things. I'm going to fill in that background to begin with. Let's get rid of this too much fun. We don't need that. And I could, notice that this is not a live text box. I could just move this to a different place for the moment to give me a reminder about it. I think I'll do that. I'm just going to move it over off the page to make it a little bit easier. I'll grab the background, and here's the photo I'm going to use. So I'll right mouse, build a selected element with the photo. I'm going to shift it, and I'm going to drag it in a little bit so that it makes this area bigger. It will actually kind of zoom it up. I want to focus on all of that color over on this space. And there's the background now, and you can see that since these flowers, this design is overlaying this, it's distracting. I don't want that there. I will go ahead and delete all of this. I've decided I'm not going to use the string, and I'm going to get rid of all of that painty stuff too. It's great, it's wonderful on some layouts. On this layout, I didn't want it to distract. I could go through and fill in all of these photos. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. We don't need to do that. I want to show you next, though, how I made that little paint strip with that cool shadow. Because custom shadows, of course, are not as easy with Artisan. They take a little bit more work. And what I do is utilize things that are already here that I know I like. This photo has that shadow underneath it that lifts it up top and down bottom. So here's the photo, and there's the shadow that goes with it. I will copy and paste that shadow. I'm going to move it down underneath my paint chip. I will carefully place it so that the top of it sticks out a little bit. I'll resize it. And then I will have to turn it and shift it and just generally eyeball it until it lifts the way I want it to. See how here it sticks out? Let's make that bigger. See how here it sticks out a little bit more? Looks like this piece is lifted off the paper. And down here it's also lifted, but here there's less shadow, so it's a little bit closer to the paper. If I shift this shadow further, we can change that look slightly, and it's subtle, but it really is noticeable. Now, we have things sticking out that we don't need to see. There's no need for putting a shadow over on this side, because if this is curled up, this is likely right down on the paper. The easiest way to do this is throw in a straight cutter. I'll angle that over because I don't need that shadow under there. And I'm going to say keep the unshaded area cut. And there we go. The shadow's where I want it to be. I will select both and I will group this. Now I can resize it and it maintains that lifted look. I'll pull it where I'd like it to be on the page and place it just the way I would like it. So it maintains that and goes with these perfectly, and I didn't have to deal with making the custom shadow myself. A couple of other cool tricks that I did on here. If we flip over and look at the layout that I made, I have this little bracket, this little frame with the word in it, and it doesn't come that way, so I'll show you exactly what I did there. I also made a QR code. I do have another video on QR codes, so I'm not going to go into that here. Oh, on this little tab right here, see I've got it over there, I ended up making my own custom shadow for that. Let me just show you quickly right here how I did that custom shadow. I'll zoom that up considerably. So the way I wanted it to look was the shadow here and just a little bit there. So see how that edge looks like it curves up? So I'm going to get rid of that so you can see exactly what I did. Now at the moment, I do also have just a regular shadow under it, a light shadow too. It helped with the effect some. But I'm going to copy and paste this. On this one, I will turn it black. I'm going to move it down below. I'm going to go to Filter, Edge, Soften Edge, and I add a pretty significant amount of softness. I really want that, the area that will show to sort of blend in and not be really harsh. And I could go softer, but I just eyeball it for where I think I want it. Because the cool thing is I can also resize it to give it a different amount that sticks out. I'll place it, and then with this I'm going to angle it down a little bit, and I'm going to carefully watch where it sticks out, because now this corner looks like it's lifted while that one's not as lifted. Now over here we have a problem, so I will use my Shift key and shrink that in. So I'm changing the aspect ratio of it. You can see that now this corner looks like it's lifted, but over here there's kind of a sharp delineation. Let's go up a little bit more. There's kind of a sharp area right here where the shadow stops. That's why I ended up, I don't know if you'd noticed, but I'd had two of these shadows, so I just copy and pasted that last one. I'll move that down below also. Now obviously it's sticking out too much here, and maybe right now a little bit too much there, so I'll pull it in some and up. I'm going up a little bit now. Notice how now it blends a little bit more. Let me turn it off and you can see the difference. See how it is, it's kind of stops, that shadow kind of stops right there, and now it continues on. It looks a little bit more realistic. This one I might want to pull in just a hair further. Now possibly I do have a little too much shadow going on over here because of this one. Take a look at the difference. That's easy to fix. I can cut, straight cutter, and I'm going to now keep the shaded area, so I want this. But notice right along here, there's all this shadow underneath. And really, I did this for that little bit right there. So I will say keep the shaded area cut. And now I've got this piece. If I turn that off, you can see it's really just for that corner, and then the rest of it that I have. I would grab all of this to group it. Then I can resize it however I'd like. Notice how it's now lifted on those two sides, and I would put it over where I want it to be. Let's look at this piece. If I go into the kit, I'm over off the page right now in the kit. I'll bring the pieces over. Here is this book plate. So I have to flip it. That's what I did with it, is I flipped it, and I did put a shadow under it. And then I wanted to use this cool word that is in the kit, fall. When I did this, I found if I made it small enough to fully fit within the book plate, it didn't seem to be big enough and full enough for the look that I wanted. What I did instead, just zooming it up so we can see it, what I did instead is I allowed it to fall out of the border of the book plate a little bit. So you can see that it extends some, but that's not a natural look. You wouldn't have that sitting up on top of the center part. So to fix that, I've got the word selected. I'll go to shapes and it will put in this square. Now I can move the lines of the square so that they line up with the edge of the book plate. Now in this case you can see that I can't get it exactly the way that I want it to go, but I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard and shift it a little bit more. Keep the unshaded area cut, and now look how it fits in. It looks like this fall was printed on this center part that now the frame is sitting over. I will, of course, put a shadow on it. Typically a light shadow, since this would be screwed down in or pinned down on. A heavy shadow makes it float off the page too much. It doesn't look as realistic. Of course, I would group it all together, resize it, and put it where I want it to be. You can see that I've got a big cluster, a fairly large cluster, and this goes down around in the same basic shape as the template was. So I used that one as a guide. And then because of these leaves down here, I decided to do a little bit, you know, the brown leaves. I decided to do just a tiny little cluster, and I did put my QR code down in there. So that took up a little bit of the space. These chevrons already have their cool shadow. Each one of them is not connected to another. So with the photos, what I do, you probably remember if you've watched many of my videos, is I just pull, let me see which papers I want. I pull the papers over into the photos section and I work from there with them. How I filled each one of those in is I took the chevron and I decided to use this folded kind of distressed paper, and I enlarged and I moved it over an area that had some of the cool crinkles in it, and I just went through with each different one and used a different color because these coordinate perfectly, and it looked really cool the way I did it. These pieces also have this custom shadow. I want to show you what I did here to give the border effect. Let me just pop back over. I know we're going back and forth a little bit. So here I can just fill in those papers really easy, but on this side it didn't look right. I'll show you in a moment. It didn't look right if I just let the paper sit where it wanted to sit, so I wanted to include this border. Let's see what I mean. If I take this piece of this section, I'll fill with the paper, and if I leave it right where it comes up, it fills from there, and see how this edge just looks like the piece of paper has been cut somewhere in the middle and plopped there at the edge, and it doesn't really finish that edge nicely. If I, however, take that paper and I now move this, right over to that edge, and then I choose it, now the edge looks like it's been finished off. It really gives it a different sort of a feel, and it seems like I did cut from the edge of the paper, which seems more natural. It really feels and looks to me a lot more realistic, as if I were paper scrapping. And that's really the goal, right? To emulate what you would do with paper scrapping and with shadows, and having things lift off the page the correct amount rather than just floating in midair somewhere. I'll pop back over. I did put some journaling down here, just a little basic line about where I was. Like I said, I added that little tab, and I decided to do a hashtag fall selfies. I was standing out there with the camera myself with all this beautiful color. I tucked one of the cool stamps in the kit down underneath to fill just a bit of space, and there was this awesome pine cone. That pine cone just fit in that spot perfectly. The word art, Hello Autumn, I love the fonts and the word art that are included, was this dark brown. When I put it on here, it seemed to take away from the color in the backgrounds. It didn't blend in quite the way I wanted it to. I started by changing it to a color in my background, so you can see the colors on the page, and I took this really light one right there. But then it still seemed a little bit too harsh. I went to my opacity and I brought it down. Now, to really see how it looks, this is basically what I ended up with, about an 83, and I could have gone less to allow it to blend in more. That's really just a matter of exactly how you want to see it. I will say, though, that when I brought over the original and put it here with the brown, with that little bit of the lighter color underneath it, that was a pretty cool look too. But I wanted the color of this background of the photo to be the main part of this page. So I liked the words, but I didn't want them to be quite so out there. I hope you learned a few tricks, a few things that you can do, some fun stuff to make these pieces your own, and to really be able to pull together a layout fairly quickly, quite easily, and having fun. Happy scrapping! Have a great day.